All right, we are kicking off another episode of Zen and Callsigns, and I have a unique guest here that ties into my background and a little bit of the show. And we have Barry with me today, who is has a pretty interesting background with military aviation and Zen Buddhism. So, Barry, thank you for being on with me today.
Thanks for having me.
I guess I'd like to start off with we'll start kind of how we typically do from your background and then kind of going into there and we'll riff and keep it going.
Okay, born on the East Coast, Baltimore, moved to Los Angeles with my family when I was like 2. I just grew up as a kid in Southern California. Went to Catholic, private boys' school actually until high school, and then a Catholic high school. Then Loyola University as a freshman, Marymount College when it was a girls' school as a sophomore, and then to University of California at Santa Barbara. And that all came about because I developed an interest in Zen when I was about 18 years old. I was going through a lot of spiritual doubt and spiritual questioning at the time. And my brother had a little book called The Gospel According to Zen on his
Okay.
bed. Very small little book of Zen anecdotes. And I didn't ever know what that Zen was, but I picked it up and for some reason it really intrigued me. I just sat down and read it cover to cover without getting up. And I'd never done that before. I go, wow, this is interesting. So I sort of dove into reading what was available at that time. And we're talking 1970 now. And what was available in those days was Alan Watts. As you mentioned, a lot of Alan Watts, Christmas Humphreys, Philip Kapleau had just come out with the 3 Pillars of Zen, I think in the mid to late 60s. D.T. Suzuki, anything I could find, I read. And it actually put me through college because every term paper I had to write, I said something in Zen, just because that's all I knew. That's all I read.
Yeah, that's why this name of the show. I was like, what do I call it?
There you go. So that interest, just banging around college, I said, I want to go to Japan because I was also doing karate at the time, Japanese Shotokan karate. And I said, something about those two things really interested me. So I wanted to go to Japan. So I realized that University of California had an exchange program. So I wangled my way to go there as a junior, actually. So I got into the program and went to Japan as a senior. Usually juniors go abroad, but in my case, they let me go as a senior. So, and before I left, I did a few Zen retreats at the Santa Barbara Zen Center in those days with Zen master named Taizan Maizumi Rōshi, who has started the Zen Center of Los Angeles, would come up with some of his senior students and do a retreat there. So I had some exposure to Zen meditation and working with a teacher before I went to Japan. Excuse me. Just getting over COVID here, so I'll be coughing on and off.
No worries.
And Maizumi Rōshi gave me the address of a place where he had studied as a young man in Tokyo. Because he was officially a priest, but he also spent some years studying with a lay Zen master named Osaka Koryu Rōshi, who, as luck would have it, was just one short train stop away from where my school was. And the exchange program school in Japan was called ICU, International Christian University. Kokusai Kiristokyō Daigak. That was the school that UC California had the exchange program with. So I went there. My major at the time was Asian studies. I was interested in Japanese religion, history, language. That was the language I was studying. So I spent my senior year in college at that school and started to commute to practice and study Zen at what was called the Hanya Dojo. It was a lay Zen school, and dojo just means school, as you know. But it was run by this Zen master, and they had a small temple. It looked like a little temple. It had a dormitory for young Zen male students who wanted to live there and practice full time. So when I left college and I finished up my degree work, so I didn't have to come back to California to finish, I got my degree while I was still there and moved into living at the Hanya Dojo. So I was in Japan almost 5 years and living mostly 100% with Japanese. And I was the only foreigner that lived there. So I certainly got to learn the language really well and get to know them and the teacher. And at the same time, in my last year and a half or so, I reacquainted myself with my karate school, and because I wanted to get my black belt before I left Japan, and I was able to do that. Excuse me. The reason I came back to the States is that I didn't want to live the rest of my life in Japan, and I'm getting older, and wondered what I would do. And I had looked into being a Navy pilot before, but they weren't accepting applications at the time I was looking. My father was a Navy pilot in World War II.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I looked into it again, and they were accepting applications. This is about 1977, 78, I guess. And so I came back to the States and tried to apply to the military aviation. I talked to the Marines, and they wanted me to run 3 miles. I go, I don't want to run 3 miles, you know. And I talked to the Navy. I even went to take the Air Force test. So I looked at all of them.
Yeah.
And did really well on the Navy's aviation aptitude test. So they took a look, even though I was old and almost too old for them, because in those days you had to be under the age of 27 when you started training. And they finally did accept me, and I just entered training a month before I turned 27.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I was able to get into the Navy, go through AOCS. And I think you did you go to what was the name of your school? Citadel?
The Citadel? Yep.
Wow. My Rio went to the Citadel, I believe.
Okay. Yeah.
Bird Sumner
Small
was
world.
a ring knocker from the Citadel. So, but I had to go to AOCS and did that and went to flight school and did good enough to get into F-14s, so I got into F-14s on the East Coast, and they when they heard about my background, they said, we're going to call you Monk. That was my call sign. So there's your Zen.
That was a question I was going to ask you of, like, what was your call sign? So that's very
Monk.
fitting. And I think sometimes you get a good one, rarely. Sometimes they're not so good.
That's right. Sometimes people won't tell you how they got their call sign.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
What was yours? What's your call sign?
Hank. It's so it's from the movie Me, Myself, and Irene with Jim Carrey.
Oh, yeah.
He plays the schizophrenic guy. So I got that. It was very fitting, and I kind of played into it a little bit on my first deployment because there were some other ones that were not so good. Now, this was the best, of the bad ones. So, yeah.
You flew, at least the picture you have I saw was, what do you call those planes? The Marine? The Osprey, right. The Osprey, yeah. At where?
Out of Miramar. So, yep, I did Miramar, and then I did 2 aircraft carrier MU amphibious carrier deployments.
Okay. So you're the Marines that kicked us out of Miramar. I was there.
Yeah. I was like, that is the worst move the Navy ever made, in my opinion.
It certainly was. It certainly was the worst move.
It was a good move on the Marines' part. I mean, like, typically we're like, hey, we'll just go to the desert. And I'm glad they made that.
Well, they closed El Toro. Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of go back to what you were mentioning before I thought that was interesting is like you had, some doubts about, I think, because I grew up Anglican Catholic, and probably, I don't know if my wife grew up Roman Catholic. And so I think it's to some degree I had some doubts too, and I didn't have a Zen book in front of me. But what were those doubts? And then what made drew you into Zen?
Good question. What were the doubts specifically? Well, I'm a natural doubting Thomas sort of guy. I grew up, my mother would try to teach me table manners, and I would always, well, who said it has to be this way? Why doesn't we do it some other way? So my mother used to get really upset with me asking too many questions. Yeah. So it's just my nature. And when I got old enough to start questioning my Catholic upbringing, and I was a good Catholic altar boy and did the whole bit. I even thought of being a priest, believe it or not. And I just started asking questions people didn't really have very good answers to.
Yeah. Sorry, you gotta hit that.
Yeah. In the end, it comes down to faith, right? You got to have faith. I can say, well, I'm too much of a natural doubter for that. So the Zen I was reading, these Zen anecdotes, it seems like the Zen master has all the answers, right? He wins the debate. And the poor monk slinks away. So these guys really know something, don't they? So I just felt that there was something there that had something for me. I just kept going down that road.
Interesting, because I felt similarly, and I didn't have that when I was younger. So I grew up in a similar situation. On my grandfather was a
All right.
server, and so I worked behind the altar with him quite a bit as a mentor. But in the back, I've always had a lot of questions, and I always was kind of like, something. There's something more, something I felt like I was missing. So I had a similar experience when I was young. What was so, and then so as you're doing Asian studies, I feel like that was kind of the theme there, some type of Zen in the background. When you had the opportunity to study in Japan and kind of make that and spend that amount of time there, what was like that factor of like this is what I'm going to do for a while, and it was kind of open ended, or how did that play
Well, I'll be honest, and don't tell anyone, don't tell the military about this. But
out?
before I went to Japan, I also had an LSD experience, and
Okay.
that was a very powerful experience for me, and it made me convinced that there was something there that my Catholic upbringing just didn't address, and was very
Yep.
important. So I had a lot of confidence, I think, in the path I was on because of that,
I
and I
see.
was never really proven wrong in that regard, except for the issue is a lot of us in those days in the 60s and 70s equated sort of Zen understanding and Zen alignment with sort of a high feeling, the spiritual high from
Well,
that kind of
yeah.
mind expanding experience. And that's not correct. Zen doesn't
Yes.
put you on a perennial high where you're
No.
drugged up all the time. It doesn't do that.
Well, there's a saying I heard about Zen. It's like it was something like in Buddhahood or whatever that was. It's like, what's it like finding Satori? It's like my everyday life, but like 1 inch off the ground. You're like floating in some way, right?
I
It's
don't,
not
I don't,
much.
I don't know that story. 1 inch off the
I'll have,
ground.
but basically, it's like everyday life. Nothing is different, but you're just kind of.
It's a
It's like
different
you can't be
perspective.
knocked off. Oh, so sorry. Go ahead.
It's a different perspective on the life you've always
Yeah.
led.
Yes.
That's part of the
Exactly.
big shift that Zen offers people. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Agreed. In my small experience with psychedelics and has not necessarily given, a little bit of the high or euphoric feeling, but and I have only did it once I was, this was only a few years, maybe a year ago, that it was only in solidified my understand or my lack of understanding of what else is there. Oh, this is the interconnected of everything, and everything and nothing, like this balance. And I'm like, okay, and or I'm on the right track of like I know nothing, but I feel like I'm closer to God or
You're,
something like that.
yeah, I'm sorry, you're freezing up here.
Okay. All right, let me just double check my
It's kind of
connection.
going out of focus and freezing up.
How's my audio?
It's good, except when that froze as well as the picture. Now you're
Okay.
back. The picture's clear. Right now, it looks okay.
All right, well, I'll keep it a little more low key.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm connected. This is like so in Bali, about 200 megabits up down is the max you can get anywhere, and well, it's
That
maybe
should
we'll
be enough.
see.
That's what I got. Yeah.
But so on that, so do you have any particular Zen koan or saying that you've always used or thought in the back of your mind or your favorite or anything like that? Do you have a particular one that you?
Funny you ask because my wife's a Zen teacher, and
Okay.
she's writing something right now, and she kind of asked me, "What's your favorite koan?" And the one that always comes to my mind is the student asked the master, "Arising and vanishing go on unceasingly. What can we do about that?" And the master replied, "Whose arising and vanishing is it?" That's a key to
Yeah.
my view. That's a very important koan for me when I worked with students. I really wanted them to see if they could grasp that because that's kind of a tough one to get in my view, but I think it's very important.
Yes. Yeah. Well said. Because even I'm like, oh yeah, what is that again? Like I constantly I constantly think about those things too. So and you mentioned Alan Watts. I would say that Alan Watts was probably as I got out when I first got out of the Marine Corps. I don't know how I found Alan Watts, and I was like, I started listening to him, and I'm kind of like, what? It kind of blew my mind a little bit. And you listened to him probably 50 years ago. So I came to him in the end of 2016, and I found that like his message was so salient to me in this balance of Eastern and Western philosophy, right? Where he had this real basic structural understanding of Christian, that this idea, and then an incredible amount of wisdom and knowledge in Western philosophy. And I felt like he brought that. So I feel like I could understand what he's saying. How did who are your guys that you found? And you mentioned Alan Watts, but could you elaborate on that a little?
Well, yeah, initially, like I said, I read all I could find. Alan, what you read, it was more than 50 years ago. Let's see, 54 years ago.
Yeah,
Amazing I'm still here. Alan Watts and the others. But as you get into Zen practice, especially formal Zen practice and with a teacher, you stop reading things like that
yeah,
because everything is just another story. And what Zen really tries to get to is not create another story out of Zen,
right,
another thing, another noose to tie around your neck, basically, because that's what people
yeah,
do. They find new religions, and it's just a different noose to tie around their necks. And so I stopped doing that decades ago,
yeah,
and when I got into the formal practice. So I would have to read, koan stuff or koan books. If you're going through koan practice, which is a specific Rinzai school practice, but in my particular school, white plum is a combination of Soto and Rinzai. Do you know those terms?
I know the first one, but not the second one, and I'd love for you to elaborate on.
There's two schools of Zen that exist in Japan today. Just quick, that Buddhism came from India to China, and the Chinese combined their understanding of Buddhism with Taoism, and that kind of morphed into Zen, which came to
Yeah,
Japan in about the 13th century and came west in about the early part of the 20th century. But the two schools that remained in Japan were the Soto school and the Rinzai school. The Rinzai school has more of that affinity with the samurai tradition, and that's how really it got started by some really high-ranking Japanese lords who were samurai and liked Rinzai Zen. That's kind of how that got going. The Soto
yeah,
school was a little bit different, than it didn't traditionally anyway focus on koans as a practice. They study koans in a lecture sort of way and talk sort of way, but they don't use them as a practice, which is typical of the Rinzai school. But my own school is a combination of those, because Maezumi Roshi's family is Soto school, and his father was a priest. He was a priest, spent years in a Soto monastery, but he also studied with Rinzai, my first teacher, Osaka Kori Roshi, in the Rinzai school. And he also studied with Yasutani Roshi, who was combination Soto and Rinzai too. So those kind of all got mixed in the modern world and became what Maezumi Roshi taught, starting in Los Angeles, but it went throughout the United States and even in Europe now. So it's a pretty broad brush right now.
yeah. Kind of, yeah. That's sorry, I'm like almost lost my train of thought there. So interesting. So between the two, I guess my other question: when people think of Zen monks, they think of a monk sitting, a lot of the times, whereas a monk sitting in meditation. And maybe that's what they're doing. Is it Zinzai? I'm forgetting maybe the term where that's the style. I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong. And so I always think about like, hey, that is interesting, maybe of holding a space, and then for Zen, and then the other one is like when you're kind of maybe if correct me if I'm wrong, but like a bodhisattva that you're like going out into the world. So could you maybe talk about the differences between the two and your thoughts there?
Japanese monasteries, typically, like with all the official monks there training, they have their own schedule. A lot of it is meditation, but a lot of it is just work to
Yep.
maintain the life, farming, whatever
Right.
they need to do to keep the place going and themselves in food and all that, just like any household, right? As far as social action, if that's what you're talking about, that is in
Yep.
Japan, that was almost nil.
Okay.
The Bodhisattva, but in America now, one of Maezumi Roshi's most senior student, Bernard Tetsugen Glassman Roshi. You know the term Roshi? It means Zen master. Actually, it just means old teacher is what it means, but it was a term applied to teachers.
Yep.
Bernie, we call him Bernie. Bernie actually got more into what you're talking about. he moved to New York, established the Zen Center, but got more into social action as a practice than just meditation. So that was, but he's kind of the first one to kind of move in that direction in
Okay.
America,
And
anyway.
do you think there's maybe like modern day that there needs to be more need for that type of social action versus just holding the space in a monastery and preserving Zen, or what's your thought?
I'm sorry, I thought I turned my phone off.
Oh, no. I
I'll turn
didn't
off
even
the
hear.
camera. Okay. One more time. Let's get back to you. Here you go. Question about, is there a more of a need for social action?
Well, I guess it's like, is there a balance there of like kind of going out into the world to do something, or, I don't know what that would be, spread the word on Zen, or is there still, I believe that there should be a balance there, but I just love your thoughts.
I always liked, one of the reasons I liked Zen initially, it wasn't a proselytizing religion. It didn't,
Yeah,
if you come to Zen, fine. If you want to leave, fine. Nobody cared.
right.
It wasn't
Yeah,
it wasn't a cult in that regard. I think if people just did what Bernie was focused on, social action, Zen will become another story. And true understanding that kind of was passed along for centuries can be lost. So I think there's enough space for both of those. Some
right.
people just really want to go for the traditional understanding. And some people go, you can understand till you're blue in the face, but we got these problems over here. And if you really got compassion for people, you go do this, right?
Right.
Because the standard argument is that, well, Zen seeks wisdom, right? And wisdom in the Buddhist context is non-dual wisdom. Chie. Shiki is knowledge, but Chie is wisdom. And there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom in the
Yes.
Eastern context. But so where was I going with that?
Well, I think it's, I think you answered it from saying like, it's non-profit proselytizing and in
I know.
itself, and I kind of get that and understand that. I guess it's just like, how do you balance the two? I think we're approaching kind of a post-scarcity society. I think the future looks bright regardless of what is happening in the world.
Uh-huh.
And and my feeling of coming into Zen Buddhism as a, 30, kind of really found it, 35, 36-year-old man, guy who had hardly ever come into it, but it definitely, I was like, I consumed as much as I could. And it helped me in my transition out of the Marine, where I'm like, ooh, this is like part of my ideology now. And I feel like I have to, I'd like to share it in a way because I think it's that cool. But it's just like, but it's like, I'm not telling anybody. It's more of like, hey, this is kind of how I don't know, I digress, but I understand what you're saying. And you look back through all of Zen Buddhism, or, my limited scope. I just think if more people understood it, they would maybe adopt it like you did when you're younger. You're just kind of, hey, I kind of have some doubts. You open a book up and it's the first book you read, chapter to chapter, right? That says something.
I I agree. I too have often thought it sure be a better world if people had some understanding like this, because they'd stop
Yeah.
creating enemies where they don't exist. Well, my point about the wisdom, traditionally, we try to find some wisdom. And the flip side of that coin is compassion, like you're talking about. That supposedly naturally arises from the wisdom you've found. But
Yes.
that can exist I mean, everybody wants to save the world. Nobody wants to help mom do the dishes. You can take that into your own life without starting an organization to pass around clothes and food to people. Every
Right.
interaction you have, and you have
Right.
plenty with your family, your kids, your people people you have to deal with. That compassion can come out in all those ways.
Yes.
And some not Zen master, but some guru once said, "The best gift you can give the world is a healthy and happy you." And because
Exactly.
that energy really affect an atmosphere and and interactions that are very positive. I admired Bernie, and I admired people who do that sort of thing. My son works at a homeless shelter on Thursday nights. I admire
Yes.
him, but you don't have to. I don't think you have to chide yourself for if that's not what you do. Do.
Yeah, and I agreed. Kind of switching gears a little bit. So after you spent, is it you spent 7 years in Japan, you decided to
Five.
come back. 5 years, sorry. Come back and you got into the Navy, went into AOCS, pilot training. So kind of start me off in Pensacola.
I was Kingsville, Texas. I went
Okay,
through basic
Kingsville.
Whiting Field and then Kingsville.
Okay. Yep. Okay. I was at Whiting as well. So yeah, so start off at Whiting, so you're like, hey, I want to do jets. You got, go from there. So how did that play out for you? Military, how long
I
are you
wanted
in? Kind of give me that old.
I wanted to do well. I wanted to do my best in flight school, and my Zen
Yep.
training had really did help a lot going through flight school. I can tell you one specific flight. It was a basic flight. Can't remember exactly what it was, but as we took off and climbed out with the instructor in the back of the T-34, he started yelling at me about something I did wrong or something. I don't remember it, but I completed the flight and we went back in the debrief. It was a pretty good flight. And he said, the best thing about that flight is most guys, once I yell at them, the whole flight goes downhill from there. And you didn't let it get to you. You just continued on and had a good flight. And I remember when he said that, I didn't even remember that he yelled at me because my mind was so naturally able to focus on the next thing, and I think that was the result of my Zen practice. It helped a lot. The ability to focus, which is a big part of initial meditation, helped tremendously in flight school. So, I got jets and went to Kingsville. My father was actually in the first class ever held in Kingsville, Texas in 1942.
Oh, no kidding.
When he came down from my winging, the commander of the base took him in the back room and asked him what are these pictures? I don't understand what's in these pictures here because it was an oval field. It wasn't straight runways in those days. You took off on an oval and landed on an oval. Anyway, we went through basic jet in T2. What did you train in? They didn't have T2s anymore, did they?
No, so I went actually the T-34, and then I did helicopters, and then I did multi-engine.
Oh, you got to go through helicopters first to get into Ospreys?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
To get the vertical part down, huh?
Oh yeah, the helo side of things, and it is, I think, one of the most important parts of the V-22 of understanding that, because that's where you die most. And if you don't have that understanding, then you eat it very quickly.
Yeah, I'll bet. And then where did you do the basic prop training then?
So yeah, T-34 is out of Whiting. Then I switched. That was North Whiting, and then South Whiting is the Bells, the helicopter training. And then I went to Corpus Christi for multi-engine training.
Okay.
Out of there. Yep. And then we flew C-12s, King Airs.
Osprey Rag. Where's the Osprey Rag?
And that is in New River, just south of Camp Lejeune.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yep.
Gotcha.
And on that note, is that I paid a guy $1,000 for me to go to Miramar and him to stay in Camp Lejeune. So it was like totally.
I think that's a smart move. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like $1,000 right now, and he took it, and immediately went to our Marine OIC, and I'm like, hey, we're switching. I'm going to Miramar. He's staying here, and he was like, really? And I'm
they
like,
let
yes,
you do that,
do
huh?
it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of a little backdoor deal.
Now, when I graduated from A4s, was my advanced jet. They said, hey, you did really well. F-14s Virginia Beach. I go, can I go to Miramar? And they said, well, you can go West Coast if you want to go A7s in Lemoore. I said, never mind. I'll go to Oceana. So I loved flight school. I loved I really enjoyed it. I did well. Got F-42 to Oceana and joined VF-41 after the RAG VF-41, and I got there 2 months after they shot down 2 Libyan fitters in 1981, I guess it was. They had the first shoot down of Libyans and that happened just before I got there. So I was with them in those days, and we did a couple of med cruises. And the med cruises, the big devil in those days was Muammar Gaddafi and Libya.
Yep.
So we always had run-ins with them and problems with them, and so that was I chased a few Libyans around, but never got into visual contact with them. They heard I was coming and chickened out.
Yeah. So how long were you in the Navy flying? Or how long?
I did my sea tour on VF-41, and for short duty, I got lucky. I got to get Adversary program at Miramar, doing the MiG tactics and Top Gun stuff, because I got to go through Top Gun in the F-14, the power projection course. And then, so I came to Miramar to be the adversary, the bad guy. You know, we flew
Yep.
A4s and F5s as MiG simulators, which was great fun. And that's when they were making the original movie, Top Gun. I was in the bar scene, but they cut me out. Made Tom Cruise look bad, I guess. And
Yeah.
so that was flying adversaries was the most fun ever.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, I avoided applying for the Blue Angels or anything like that because I wanted adversary was just the best. And then when I liked flying in the Navy, but cruise, I had a young son and a wife, and cruise was not, you're gone so long from your family when you're on cruise. I decided to get out in '87 and got a job with American Airlines, but I was able to join the reserve adversary squadron at Miramar. So I just kept doing what I had been doing in the reserve unit.
Yeah.
So it was like
Awesome.
heaven. It was like being in heaven. In San
Yeah.
Diego, surfing in San Diego, flying adversary, and at American, they didn't use us much. I spent most of my time in the squadron. Oh,
Awesome.
the regular Navy guys hated us
Yeah.
because we'd show up with our long hair.
Yeah, well, they're just jealous. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're talking about going surfing in the afternoon, and we're getting ready to go on cruise, and they hated
Yeah.
us. But we provided more than 50% of the adversary services at Miramar.
Yeah.
Because we did a lot of work there with.
Do you have an interesting story or culminating event in the Navy flying or leadership or anything?
Leadership. That's funny. Who did I talk to? My first Rio from Citadel, Bird Sumner.
Yep.
We talked about leadership or being squadron commander or something, and I said, Bird, I don't want to lead anybody anywhere in this life. I wanted to be an operator. I wanted to be a good pilot. I didn't care about leading people. So that's not very good if you're a military officer. And I guess I realized that over time. I was an operator, a devoted operator, but trying to deal with I had to lead people. I had enlisted people working for me in power plants branch or avionics branch officer. I definitely had enlisted people I dealt with. And I just was never as good as I should have been at it. But yeah, good thing I got out. I don't think I made a good admiral.
So how long did you spend?
Regular and reserve, 16 years. I got an early retirement because they were trying to get rid of people. And I just fit a little window. I was 05 and rifted from my unit because we got F-18s and they had to reduce the size of the squadron. And I was a commander and there was a bunch of commanders and I wasn't going to screen for command. So they had to get rid of people. And I was one they got rid of. I just missed the F-16 because we were getting F-16s and the VF-126 right as I was leaving. And they were just getting F-18s as I was leaving the reserve unit. And we were flying A4s.
Yeah. Was there, so for your time in the military, you had your background, your Zen training, and obviously you got the call sign. Was there any, do you have any close calls or near misses flying that it's a good story?
Well, the first big close call was my first night landing on the Nimitz. I was obviously qualified in night traps. And did you do any carrier time? Or you said you did.
I spent almost 2.5 years on LHDs.
You guys catch you just come vertical, right?
Yeah, we come kind of at a 45-degree angle to the side of the ship. So, so no wires or anything like that.
No
traps. And we're on.
Okay. My first night landing on Nimitz in the Mediterranean after I joined my squadron.
Yep.
In Christmas of 81, I guess. It was, if there's a storm out there, the carrier is always in the middle of it. Yeah. And I'm coming in. It's raining like crazy. There's 40 knots of wind down the deck, and the needles are down. The ACLS.
Oh, yep.
Carrier's ILS is not working, so it's TACAN only.
Yeah.
I'd be lucky to find the ship, much less find the landing area.
Yeah.
So the first two were just so off, and it was raining so hard I couldn't see out the front of the windscreen. I had to fly out the side panel. Yeah. And so they waved me off twice in a row. Now I'm running low on gas. I'm thinking it's going to be dicey if I have to eject out here in this kind of weather. I'm probably not going to make it. So they come around for my last attempt, and now I'm lined up fairly well, but it's raining so hard I can't see that well. And I keep getting calls from the LSO to come right for lineup. So I'm coming right for lineup. He says, come right for lineup. And I go, I think I'm too far right. Come right for lineup. And his last thing before I touch down, he yells, come left. So I slapped the stick left at the last second. My left tire came down right of the center line. I actually ducked because I thought I was going to hit the planes that were parked on the right. And my hook skipped all the wires. And I started rolling down the deck at an angle and actually went off, not the angle deck, but the right tire, I think, went off the angle. The left tire went off the scupper there, off the side of the ship. But I got airborne, pissed to the heart. And now I was running out of gas. And luckily, they gave me a bingo. Said, your signal is bingo, get out of here. Go to Palma de Mallorca was a divert field. So I and about 5 other planes diverted into Palma. Plane in front of me blew a tire on the runway. And I said, can you please hobble off? Because I'm going to have to eject if you can't. I'm out of gas. And he said, okay, I'll hobble off. So he kind of hobbles off the runway, and I was able to land, go park. I had 4 live missiles on the airplane, no safety pins, no gear pins. And we both had to go try to clean the stuff out of our flight suits. Yeah, we should have actually stayed with the jet all night with that situation because it was just a civilian field. But we said, screw it, we're going to go get a beer and go to the hotel and try to sleep. And hopefully these missiles are here tomorrow when we come back. And they were, thankfully. But my left tire, I could tell, it was a brand new tire with perfect treads, except on one part about this big, it looked like somebody had taken a knife and just sliced into the tire. That was the part that I think went off the side of the ship. But it didn't blow. It didn't blow. And I was lucky. And I said, well, let's see if we can get this thing back to the ship. So we all went back to the ship the next day, and we were able to land. And then they said, hey, we're going to put you on the night schedule again tonight. And we were both kind of nervous, but we said, this is the job. I guess kind of buckle up buttercup here. And so we went and did it again. So anyway, that was the first one. But the others in dogfights and in Top Gun and things like that were very close calls that you almost died but didn't. But they happened so fast that it was like, just a sudden shot of piss to the heart, and then it was over. It didn't have, when at the carrier that night, I had a long time to think about my demise. And so that was more nerve-wracking than a quick near midair.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that's, I think that from my experience at, nighttime landing on the ship, and then as I've heard, before I joined even the military, I'm like, yeah, that's great and all, but doing nighttime traps, low light in the rain, bad weather at the ship, it's all fun and games. So that's where you're probably going to die. And I experienced that too, where you're like, oh, this is the scariest thing. Because those other ones are just like, you're like, oh, I don't even have time where like you're flying around like, oh shit, I'm gonna eject. And even if I live on the ejection, I don't think they're gonna be able to find me in the water just because so there's a lot more going. So I feel like did your Zen training help you in those
At the moment of flying around the ship that night trying to land, I was so focused on what I had to do. There was fear because I knew what could happen. But my mind space was fully taken up with what I was trying to do and the fear from that small area of my brain that said, if you don't do this right, you're done, So I didn't have time to do anything else. There was no mental capacity. Did my Zen training help me? I always think that the focus part of my Zen training always helped.
Yeah.
But of course, Navy training is also, that's part of the training. So the combination there and the sudden near mid-airs, that happened so fast, there was no chance to think about anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess your time in the Navy, then now you're retired from the airlines as well.
Yes. And as I think I noted, I'm retired. My wife and I are both Zen teachers. We both have that official title of Rōshi. Well, I don't use it because I think the term Zen master is way too misleading for modern. So we never used it. We use sensei, which is sensei just means teacher in Japan. But now I don't use anything. some of my students still call me that, but I don't call myself that. And that's not out of false humility. That's just out of understanding the truth of things.
Yes. There is a saying that I've heard, and I don't know if you've heard. It's a Ling Lu, and probably wrong in that pronunciation. And it said basically, if you are, when you're traveling and you meet the Buddha along the road,
Yeah, kill him.
and I was like, when I first read that, I was like, what's that mean? And now I kind of understand that. And I bring that point up because of what you're saying now. It's like, to never, I'm never is that the idea? I'm never the teacher. I don't know anything. I only am
Yeah,
repeating things that have already been said. I mean, and
right.
what's your,
Yeah, totally. Kill the Buddha is a favorite phrase in Zen, and that just at some point you have to rely on yourself. The
right?
Buddha is, and Buddha admits it. They're just misleading people. Zen teachers say, "I'm just here to mislead you until you wake up, and stop listening to me." Basically, um,
Yeah,
but true. This is part of. In the end, we learn to trust that that person I was talking about who's arising and vanishing is it that person that
right.
entity learns to be trusted. And so yeah, you kill the Buddha, you kill the patriarchs, kill your Zen teacher. Don't kill your wife. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't give poor
Well, I
Kelly.
think that that's some part of Zen that I found thought-provoking is the Zen koan. Is like, as I first started going to those, where that is the whole idea of, as you're saying, like the Rōshi or a teacher or sensei is like, they're like, telling you to look inside. Like that's the idea. Like if you're seeking or desiring something outside you, you're going to fail. There's nothing else. It's just turn the inner eye into yourself, and like that's where you're going to discover your balance and compassion, all those. Is that just again from my novice idea? What's your
Yeah, turning the light around is a great phrase. That's what we do. We turn the light inward and to try to illuminate that. And when I look at the great teachers I've had, and I worked with Koryo Osaka Roshi, Maizumi Roshi, and then Charles Tenshin Fletcher was my last teacher. He's the abbot of Zen Mountain Center at Idlewild. When I
okay?
think about what they did, they really didn't try to teach me much of anything, but they tried very hard to show me the fallacy of what it is I thought I knew, of what I was holding to. So that was kind of the ultimate gift they gave me. Show me the empty nature of everything I was holding to. And because everything you're holding to and relying on in this regard is, a mental construct, another story.
Right. When you said before, and in Zen they talk about non-dual, and can you elaborate on what
Yeah,
you
sure. One of the first goals of early koan practice is to give the students some understanding, some insight into the non-dual nature of reality. Because our minds, we are born with, and what did I say in my book? We have a genetic inheritance and a cultural conditioning of a discursive dualistic intellect. Does that make sense? I mean, we're
Yes.
trained to think, okay, I'm here, I'm talking to Blake there, and he thinks this when I think that, and I think he's wrong, and I think I'm right about this endless story that runs through our heads, and the basis of it is duality from the Zen perspective. So an insight into the non-dual nature of reality is what we use early koan practice for. Like one of the early koans, which is a good one, is how do you stop the sound of the temple bell? That's a
Yeah.
koan, and you have to have some insight into the non-dual nature to be able to answer that. And so, but that's early on. And so the koan practice has several divisions and sections to it, but that's one of the early and very important ones, non-dual nature, because
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, sorry.
that's one of the main ways we create suffering is this insistence on a dualistic worldview. And we call that a relative view in Zen. The dualistic worldview, I mean, the whole world runs on that. I mean, I have an identity. I know what my name is, what my job is, what my parents were. I was brought up as a Catholic. I know this is the truth and that's a lie. So people who agree with me are my friends, and people who disagree are ultimately enemies. And we're always at war with these
Yeah.
delusions.
I mean, I see that in politics, in basically everywhere, but in the United States, where Democrat to Republican is simply, dualistic, obviously, and it's the
Sure.
same side, or it's the opposite side of the same coin. And I feel like that's how you divide people, right? Having just here's your two options, but it's the same. And I'm like, hey, let's awaken from that to some degree. And that's, why I feel like I wanted to chat with you, because it's not just the two options. It's like there is an infinite amount of options are like out there. And that's why I felt that Zen is a kind of way, maybe in this understanding is like a way of liberation. Is like, hey, it's not two options. Liberate your mind to understand like this multitude of options out here and pathways where no, it's not necessarily wrong, but it's like here's the so many.
Hmm.
Do you see it that way as well, or
And one of the basic tenets of Buddhist philosophy is the co-arising of the opposites. Have you ever heard that term? So
yes, but love for you to elaborate.
if you raise up something and say this is good, you've automatically identified the bad.
Right,
Automatically it's identified. And actually, I talked to your wife about this. Well, one of the most basic form of energy that I know in the cosmos is quantum jitters. You know anything about quantum mechanics? Quantum jitters is quantum foam, where the sudden arising of particle and antiparticle pairs come out from seemingly nothing and meet and annihilate. This creates
right,
an energy buzz. It's very small, but it's a non-zero energy state that exists even in empty space. So, but that very basic energy creation phenomena, I can see transformed into larger and larger entities, and in man and woman,
right,
fauna and flora and fauna, night and day, good and bad. These are the opposites that arise, meet, sadly, sometimes not in a friendly way, and
yeah,
annihilate. That's the energy of life that moves forward. And but like you say, yeah, there's a zillion options. The key thing Zen tries to get us to understand is that these two options, these two things that arise, are fine, but by nature they're empty of self nature. They are
right,
just manifestations of emptiness or energy, if you will. So they have lifespans that are not eternal for sure, and they arise from a combination of factors that we can't fully understand or control. But they do arise and they do interact, but they're empty. It's kind of like watching you ever seen a dust devil move through your yard? You
yes,
can see something there. It's a combination of humidity and heat differentials and leaves blowing around, but it's just something there, but pretty soon it's gone.
right.
And that's what reality is to a Zen Buddhist. It's an empty
Well, I feel like
expression.
that, yeah, like that is what reality is if you understand it and want to, would you
I
say
would
that's
say,
true?
no, it's reality to anyone. They just don't get it.
Right.
There's a saying in Zen that all beings are endowed with the wisdom and the virtue of the Buddha, but because of basically greed, anger, and ignorance, they don't appreciate it.
Yeah. And kind of a question coming, since we both came from Christian backgrounds, and I would like to, in a dualistic society, maybe we're in the fact that if I am Christian, that means, for a lot of people, then you can't be Zen Buddhist. And I disagree with that.
Oh
And
yeah,
I
that's
think
not
you
true at
can,
all. We're some famous. We've got in the White Plum Zen teachers who are Catholic priests, who are nuns, Catholic nuns. Oh
yep.
yeah, Zen takes anybody. But
And so I
no, there
guess
are,
can you,
and you can even find Father. I know Father. What's his Zen name? Kennedy? Robert Kennedy is a Catholic priest. Spent a lot of time in Japan in a Catholic mission and started studying Zen when he was there. I think he was at Sophia University in Tokyo. Anyway, he's written a book on Catholicism or Christianity and Zen, and I know some nuns also. So
yeah.
Zen is perfectly willing. Now, how his feelings of God and what Catholic Church or the Catholic teaching have evolved because of his Zen practice and understanding, I don't quite know because I didn't read his book, but probably interesting.
Can you elaborate on, why they can go together and from,
Well, a Catholic faith, I'm assuming, would accept a God and a Jesus as the Son of God, and et cetera, et cetera. And Zen would say, well, Zen doesn't deny other entities. It doesn't admits
Right.
it doesn't know about these things, but it would say, and Father Kennedy would probably in these notes have to agree, we are all manifestations of empty eternal energy of the universe. And if you want to call that, go ahead. Is it conscious? Well, you're conscious, right? So,
Right.
hello, you must in some way it manifests as human consciousness and all the consciousness of biology on the planet. Now, so we would say, yeah, Jesus is the Son of God, but we'd say, so are you. Who isn't?
Yeah.
Who isn't a son
Yeah.
and daughter of God? But it doesn't claim knowledge of things it doesn't realize. It just says, well,
Yes.
I personally don't believe in the kind of God I was taught as a child. Doesn't mean there's not something. There's, because I've worked with shamans as well. And they say,
Right.
well, there's this thing called source. Your wife, right? She
Right.
would deal with source and soul and all the entities that arise from that and interact and learn whatever they're here to learn. And I remember I talked to your wife about some of my issues with this thing. It seemed, I said,
Yeah.
must like war, famine, pestilence, and plague because it keeps coming here and doing it. And those things are beyond me, and they're beyond
Right.
what Zen would taught me. But I really appreciate what Zen did teach me because it took away the angst of a relative view alone, a relative dualistic view alone. That creates all that natural angst, and people worry about their death. They worry about
Right.
this and that and the other thing. But I think the Zen understanding realization can relieve you of that because you're not really Barry or Blake. You are something else entirely, which is the absolute. We call it the absolute, relative and the absolute. We are ultimately the absolute, which experiences itself through Barry, through Blake, through all these things. And
Agreed.
that it relieves a lot of the angst that naturally arises from a dualistic worldview alone.
Yes. And I mean, I experienced that in my kind of discovery of Zen, where it was like, it wasn't, hey, one or the other, dude, it's both. And I think as you were just mentioning in kind of quantum physics, it's like, it's that superposition. It's both at the same time,
Yeah, yeah.
and so that was my kind of, because I love sci-fi, and that is how the world illuminates it to me. I'm like, oh, I get all I don't need to know physics. I'm just gonna read sci-fi
Did you
to
watch? There's
like
a
figure.
show out that uses superposition as its plot. It's
Right.
called on Apple TV or something. We saw it. It was pretty impressive. They
Yeah,
use
yeah.
that superposition.
Um, exactly. Kind of next question for you is when did you decide to write your book? And it's a Top Gun Monk, so everybody can
No, it's
go
Top
get it
Gun
on
Zen.
Amazon. Top
Top
Gun
Gun Zen.
Zen. Sorry.
I
How
don't
did
like
that
the
come
title.
about? Why did you?
When I finished my Zen training and became a teacher, I had learned so much along the years, and it was combined with this military experience. So I initially wanted to call it the importance of Zen and the importance of what did I call it? I wanted to talk about those various things. The importance of mysticism, science, air combat, and daily life. I
Yeah.
tried to see how all that actually can be worked together and appreciated from a different standpoint. I even talk about, because a lot of Buddhists' feeling is that, well, violence is a really bad thing. And, well, what is compassion in the realm of violence then? I wrote a chapter on what compassion is in the realm of violence. And so I looked at things that a lot of people haven't looked at in the Zen tradition or in the military tradition. So
Mhm.
I thought I'm the one guy to write this, so I wrote it.
Well, I had a question on that. That's really interesting you say that because I wrestle with this, and something I even chat with about my wife is because it's again Zen doesn't touch on that. There's some samurai stuff that kind of touch on it, but if you're incapable of violence, then you're harmless, and if then you're nothing. You're like worthless, and I guess and so my thought is like so you have to be capable of violence to protect the things that you love because right because again as like I wrestle with that in my mind as well, and I think you touched on that, so I'd love to get your perspective on that because it's like hey, for the person to be the monk, this peaceful loving person, to hold the space there, I feel like there has to be like the Viking or whatever defending them, like and protecting them. What's
I'm
your
sure we'd agree. Like I said, I wrote a whole chapter on it in the book. Maybe you could read it sometime. But
okay?
in Zen, we actually look at the precepts are like commandments. Okay, in Christianity, we have precepts too,
Yep.
similar. But we look at them in Zen practice, at least in my school, from three different angles. There's you've ever heard Hinayana Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism?
Yes, but I'd love for you
Those are
to
the two main
elaborate.
sects of Buddhism. Hinayana prevalent more in Southeast Asia, and the Hinayana more in Korea and Japan and northern China. So the Hinayana is very strict approach to if it says don't kill, don't kill. End of story. All right. That's a very conservative basic we call that the Hinayana approach. And there's the Mahayana approach, which is a little more person, place, and amount idea. For example, let's
Right.
say you're exceeding the speed limit, taking your wife to the hospital to give birth to your child. You're stopped by a cop, and the cop says, "Well, I got to write you a ticket here, Mister." But you said, I'm trying to get to the hospital. My wife's about to give birth," and he goes, "Oh shoot, let me lead you." So now you're both breaking the speed limit. You're both breaking the law. So what? It's for a good cause. So it's not a strict look at the letter of the precept. We got to know right time, right person, right place, right amount. Then the third way of looking at the precepts is the Buddhayana, which is in the sense of killing. Ultimately, there's no one to kill and no one who's doing the killing. That's an appreciation that comes from true realization. And so we look at those three angles and try to appreciate them all. And I talk about that in that chapter and use the example of my friend from Miramar, Tom McGinnis. He was the first officer on American Flight 11, which was the first plane to hit the World Trade Center on 9/11. A good friend of mine. So what would he have done if he had a chance to defend himself and not turn the plane over to terrorists? Okay, let's say he killed a couple terrorists. Well, you just saved how many thousands alive did you just save on the ground? Are you going to call that
Right.
an immoral act on his part, or somehow transgressing against a precept or commandment that can't be questioned? I say
Right.
bullshit. So that's my argument to people who would claim, well, if you're a Buddhist, you can't do certain things. I say, well, if you're a dumb Buddhist, I guess you can't. But
Yeah.
that's not
Well,
me.
that was well said because I feel like that's the same thing as like we're to have a balance. Like there's, when I always think when people say like a maxim, like, "Hey, this is how it is." Uh, see, I don't know. It's like there may be a balance to that. There may be other options, and I think that like those three are really, or if you have those three paths almost, then you offer yourself more options, if you will.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So that's a real valuable practice in our school of looking at the commandments, the precepts from those angles. Very flexible.
Yeah. Is there anything else that I'm missing, or I know we're just over an hour, but that I should ask, or something interesting about yourself to share? So I don't because I don't want to take up more of your time. But
Well,
do you have anything, Barry? Like I should
interesting.
ask, or
Do you ever watch samurai movies?
yeah,
That
I
program?
mean I do you have a good
I
recommendation?
made
Oh,
some
sorry, go
money
ahead.
in Japan by acting in Japanese movies and TV, and I got to meet my hero. Toshiro Mifune was one of the great samurai actors in Japan, and I got to meet him and do something with him in my first TV thing. So anyway,
Okay,
I just had some fun stuff. But I'm a big surfer. Keep surfing; it's really good for you. Now I'm a skydiver. I skydive now because I can't surf anymore. My hips gone. I'm trying to have a little
excellent.
fun before I check out.
Oh, you know what? I had another question for you. Kind of more of a thought is I've read is it Masasho? Damn it, I am spacing on
Miyamoto
his name.
Musashi. Miyamoto Musashi.
Yes, The Book of Five Rings.
Yeah, the Book of
And
Five Rings.
I've thought that is, if we're talking about violence, that how do you, how do you balance the two? And I've thought that book and his story is like, well, I guess that's how you do it. If you are going down the path of violence, right? I'm gonna be a swordsman, and just a roaming swordsman in Japan, and or that's doesn't happen now, but like that's how my thought of like that's how you do it of like, and that's how you win 100+ duels in a row. So I'd love to get your thought or
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Miyamoto Musashi in my youth, and I've read it. I don't remember that much about it, but I'll tell you a great samurai story. This was
yeah,
after there was a famous samurai who became a Zen master, Yamoka Teshu. I think I read about him too. Yamoka Teshu was a 6'2", 210-pound Japanese samurai. He was lived in the 19th century, toward the end of the Meiji. Was it the Meiji era? Toward the end of the shogun, the Tokugawa shogunate. So he was one of the
yep,
last of the samurai, and a very dedicated Zen student as well. And there was another famous samurai at the time, and they both had their own samurai schools. And their students wanted them to meet and have a duel. You know, a wood sword, but not. Come on,
yeah,
you guys should fight because you're the most renowned swordsman. So they eventually did. And the story is that they both, sat there facing each other in the combat hall there, Kendo hall, and they just stood there for like 45 minutes, just staring at each other, and then they both slowly backed away and left. And the
yeah,
reason was that there was no opening. The guy was so present, aware, and focused on his opponent that there was no opening. And I remember I used to use that idea in dogfighting because I would fly my jet at its maximum performance and just watch the other guy. And usually they would try to do something that left an opening for me. They would make a mistake. I wouldn't do anything right. I wait for them to make a mistake, and they always did because they got too aggressive or they lost sight or something. And to me, was a real key. Just being fully knowing how to fly your plane, but being fully present and aware of the other guy. And he would
yep,
usually slip up, and you enter that opening that he gave you. But those two masters, there was no opening there because they really
yep.
were master swordsmen. I thought it was a good story.
I mean, well said, because I feel like that's the sorry to add on to that, but there's another one where it's like the two best sword makers. They're like, hey, those two guys come together. Like, who has the sharper blade? And so they put the blades in the water, and one sword maker, and then they put a piece of silk in the water and they let it flow down, and the silk comes across the first blade, and it just parts the silk. Then the other blade goes in the water, and then that silk comes by the blade and just goes directly around the blade. Which one is the better sword maker? You're like, oh,
Probably the one that goes
you
around
know.
the blade, right?
I agreed, and I think that's the super positioning where of of quantum physics meet Zen Buddhism, and something like that. And it's like that's Alan Watts probably keyed me in onto that a little bit, where
The
I'm like,
first
oh,
half
how
of
the
my
hell?
book, the first
Yes.
whole half of this book is on science and quantum mechanics.
So I would have gotten your book, but it wouldn't have gotten out here
That's
still.
okay.
And I don't, you don't have the Kindle version. Otherwise,
That's okay. Nobody else reads it either, so it's okay.
well, I would have gotten it. So, but it would have taken, I think, about 2 weeks to get over to, or more, to get. But Barry, thank you so much for your time. It's been a
Yeah,
pleasure.
it
If
has
you
been.
could
It's been
just
fun.
maybe give everybody a plug of your book, maybe I don't know if you have a website, so they can
Yeah,
find
you can
find you.
find it on Amazon.
All right, Top Gun. Yeah, so I'll be getting mine as well. But again, thank you, Barry. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for speaking.
It was fun. My pleasure. I don't get to talk like this with how many military guys are interested in Zen? Not many.
I
But
think more should be, and I'd love. This is why I do that. So this is the idea. So we'll sign off for now, and if you want to stay on, I'm just going to end the recording, and we'll catch everybody next time.
yeah, are you off?